All right, so we're going to take a look at this amortization schedule problem here, and it's a pretty complex problem. And I guess if you're watching this as a video, then maybe pause and read it.
Hi guys.
If not, if not, you've already read this thing. And so what we want to do is basically write a program that prompts the user for the loan amount, period of the loan in years, and APR. And then we want to generate a table of monthly payments similar to the table that is down here. So we're going to tell them how much you're paying in principal, how much you're paying in interest per payment, and the remaining balance that still needs to be paid off every time we make a payment. Okay, so this is like, you guys are right now like too young to take out a loan, but eventually you might be doing that, and this is something that's maybe interesting. Yeah, you guys will have college loans, so maybe it's a good idea to pay attention. Okay. Okay. So the first thing that I'll say here is that we can do some formatting like this a little bit differently than we've done in this class before, and so I'm going to show you how to do that. And I'll be honest, it's something that I never really remember how to do on my own. So it's something that you can look up. And let's see if I actually did that here. So we're gonna just go like this and see if I figured this out. Where did I do that? Formatting. Okay, so what I did is I just did a real quick search for how to format Java output. First thing here was for formatting numeric print output, which is what I want to know about. So it turns out that not only is there like system.out.print and println, but there's also system.out.format. And what happens when you do a format is basically you can put in these little like wildcard placeholders. Okay, so it might be kind of hard for you guys to see from where you're at, but you can do like a %f, and that's a float or a double variable that's going to be put in there. %d is a decimal integer. So what that means is a base 10 integer. %s is like another wildcard, and that's for strings. So then the way you would continue doing this is you would say, okay, well, this float variable is right there. This decimal integer is right there, and this string variable is right there. So I don't know if these examples are perfect for you guys, but I'm going to try to work through at least one real quickly so you guys can kind of figure out what's going on. The other one, the other kind of, it's not really a wild card, but it's another sort of formatting thing with this %sign, is this %n, which is like another way of doing a new line character. Okay, so instead of the \n that we've seen before, you can do %n as well. So then there's also like a bunch of stuff that you can do besides that. So like we already talked about decimal integer float and new line character. We talked about I don't even see the string in here. So, but anyway. Another thing that we can do, so let's look at this example right here. So there's this pi variable. So if I wanted to print out pi, I can do %f to print out pi, and it'll print it out like that. If I do %.3f, then it'll round that off to 3 decimal places. So that might actually be kind of helpful for us in this example because I want to round it to 2 decimal places. When I'm doing this. So maybe rounding is the wrong term here. Maybe I think it's truncating rather than rounding. Okay, so it's just cutting it off at 2 decimal places. It's not rounding it off. All right, so we'll come back to that. Let's write a program that prompts the user for the loan amount, period of the loan in years, and the APR. So let's go over to here, maybe. There we go. And you can see that I've done this once before. So I'm just going to actually delete this guy and start it over again. But let's maybe look at this example. So here in this example class, we have an int, 2 doubles, and a string. So a, x, y, and t. This is saying x is %.2f. Okay, so that is going to say that %f is going to look for the first variable that I have over here. Then this %f is going to look for the next variable that I have over here. %d is looking for this variable, and %s is going to look for this variable, so it can like put in its value. Okay? So this is just like a quick example of using that format. So x is 4.50, y is 3.20000. Okay? So it's getting this y value, which is 3.2, and tacking on a bunch of zeros onto it. The reason that x didn't have those is because I put the 0.2 in there so that it cuts it off after 2 decimal places. Okay? So d is for, again, an integer. Why they use d, I guess, is because of the decimal idea. And then t is the string. %s is what we want to use if we want to put a string in there. Okay? So let's go back and just start with the amortization problem here. So I'm going to make a new class, Amortization Schedule. Alright, so just like a lot of these problems that we've been doing, we're going to create a scanner. And then I'm going to go ahead and close the scanner right away so I don't forget to do that later. It automatically imported that for me. And just to kind of get this thing moving pretty quick here, we're going to say enter the loan amount. And I believe that they called that P. So I'm going to input the next double for that. Then it says enter the number of years for the loan. And I don't think it gave me a variable for that. So I'm just going to say years equals input dot next double. And then it asks me to enter the APR. So the annual percentage rate for the loan. And I'm going to call that APR. Input the next double there. And so the like kind of confusing thing for this particular problem is there's like a bunch of intermediate steps that I need to take in order to do what I want to do for this problem. So let's just kind of go back here. A is the periodic payment, okay? And it tells me down here how to figure that out. Or I'm sorry, it tells me in this formula right here how to figure that out. But A depends on P. It also depends on I and N. So we got to figure out what those are too. So P is the starting balance. Well, that's what I input via the user. I is the interest rate, see below. So I is the APR divided by 12 times 100. Okay? So let's go ahead and figure out what that's going to be. So double I is going to equal the APR. And if I do divided by 12 times 100, that's actually going to give me the wrong answer. Okay? Yeah, so basically what happens here is it's going to figure out APR divided by 12, get a result, and then multiply that by 100. So I either have to do APR divided by 12 and then divided by 100, that'll give me the right value, or if that just makes more sense to you to say times 100, then we want to put that in parentheses to get that basically interest rate. Okay? Going back to here, N is the number of payments. So the assumption here is that we're paying every month. And so N is going to equal the number of years that I'm paying this for times 12 months per year, basically. Okay? So that's my number of payments. If I wanted to comment this, I would say interest rate. Okay? And then the last thing that they said we should figure out is A. Okay? And A is basically the amount that I'm going to pay every time. Okay? Every month. Or I should be paying every month for me to be in good standing with whatever loan company I have. So that's going to be equal to this formula up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of pull this down so I can see the formula up here and write the result of it down here. So we're going to go ahead and go P times, and then I need parentheses for that whole thing that I'm multiplying P times, and then I want a set of parentheses for the numerator, and then a set of parentheses for the denominator. So hopefully that idea makes a lot of sense to you. And we're going to go in here and say I times, that's a power, so I'm going to go math.pow 1 plus I, and that's to the n. Okay. And then I'm going to go in here. This is for the denominator. That's another power, so I'm going to go math.pow. And that's again 1 plus I to the n. And this time I'm taking that minus 1. Okay. Oh, I guess I called this capital P up here, so that's why I have an error under here. So that's capital P times that. So that should be my my monthly payment, basically. Okay. So let's click back over to here. So I think I've figured everything out as far as this goes. So we have A, P, I, and N. We input the APR. So then this is kind of like a hidden part of this. So the amount of interest included in each loan payment is the current balance times the fractional interest rate. Well, that fractional interest rate is I. Okay, so we're going to use that sort of line of reasoning for figuring out how much I'm paying in interest each year. Okay, so we really need two more variables. We need a variable that's going to change for how much interest I'm paying each month and how much principal I'm paying each month. And then the principal is going to be taken away from the overall balance, and that's how you pay down your balance. Does that idea make sense to you? Okay, so basically you have this big chunk, right? You have this big chunk that you're borrowing, right? Every month you're going to make a payment. Some of that payment is the interest that you owe for that big chunk of money, okay? And some of that is the amount that you're paying to take away the chunk that you are paying down. So we should see the balance slowly decreasing, and the interest is going to slowly decrease as well, while the principal amount slowly increases. So we're paying more and more principal as we go by, and less interest as the balance amount goes down. Okay? So let's go ahead and see what we can do for this. So we're going to go back to here, and we're going to make two more variables. So the interest payment and the principal payment, okay, are two more variables that I'm going to have to keep track of. And I want to keep track of that for each payment that I make. Okay? All right. So for like a 4-year loan, we'd have 48 payments. Okay? So we don't want to sit and copy and paste 48 times. Instead, we want to do that in a loop, right? And so hopefully it makes a lot of sense to you that that's something that we can count. So using a for loop would make sense. and we'd want to say that we want to count how many payments we're making. So I'm going to say int payment equals 1. Payment needs to be less than or equal to n, the number of payments that I'm making, and each time I go through this loop I want my payment to be equal to my old payment plus 1. So I want to increase payments every time I go through this loop. Okay? So like I said, it's going to be kind of a confusing problem, but we're well on our way. Okay? So that line that I have highlighted in there says the amount of interest included in each load payment is the current balance times the fractional interest rate. Okay? So the way that I would write that in code is to say my interest payment is equal to I times P. My interest rate times the principal amount. Okay? Remember that A is the total amount that you're paying every month. Okay? And so my principal payment is equal to A minus the interest payment. Okay? So you take your total payment, subtract how much you're paying in interest, that's how much you're paying in principal. Okay? And then what we want to do is say that gives me a new loan amount, basically. So my new loan amount, or P, is going to be my old loan amount minus however much I'm paying off of it, my principal payment. Right? So it's pretty complex, but it goes in that step. So, and I can kind of show you over here that it says the remainder of the payment applies toward the principal. Okay, so that's my principal payment, and that's what I'm taking away from the loan amount. That's to figure out how much I still owe. Okay? All right, so now we want to think about how do we format this? How do we get this to be printed out? Okay, so I'm going to say that there's a tab in between the pound sign and the principal and the interest and the balance. Go over here, and before I get into this for loop, I'm going to print out a line that has a pound sign, a backslash T, I think it says principal, backslash T, interest, backslash T, and then balance. Balance, that's how you spell that. And then inside of this for loop, after we figure out what the interest payment, principal payment, and new balance are, let's go ahead and print those out as well. Okay? So we're going to print those out using that format line that I showed you guys a second ago. All right? So let's go system.out.format. Okay? And what we want to print out is, first of all, we want to print out the payment number. Okay? So since that's an int, we're going to put in here %D. All right? And then what I want to do is print a tab. So I'm going to put a space in there just to kind of make it so it's a little bit easier to read. Okay? Then I want to print out a tab, and the next thing that I want to print out is well, it says right here, I want to print out the principal. Okay, so principal, that's my principal payment. That's a double, so I'm going to do %F. But remember that I really only want to see 2 decimal places after the number. So between the % and the F, I'm going to put in a 0.2. Okay, and then I'm going to put in a tab. And I'm going to do the same thing for the interest amount. So %.2F, another tab, and the last thing that I want to put in there is my balance, which is really my P value that I have in line 31 there. So that is going to be the same sort of thing. We're going to go %.2F, And then what I do is where it says arg1 here, I start putting in the arguments that I want replaced by these kind of wildcards, %D, %F, etc. So I want my payment, and then a comma, and then I want my principal payment, and then I want my interest payment, and then I want P. So unfortunately that gets like to be a pretty long line there, but hopefully you can see enough of it right there to like give you a good idea. Okay. The one thing that I forgot here is that I really want a new line at the end of that formatted line. So I'm going to put in a %N inside of the quotes, and that's going to give me my new line so that the next thing gets printed on the next line. All right. Anybody need more time catching up to that? Say it one more time. Is a new line character. So you could do it this way as well. That would do the same thing.
So it's like the percent and the backslash the same thing?
They're not the same thing. It's just that this is like a this is a Unicode character basically, okay, and this is like a Java kind of wildcard character that tells us it's a new line. Okay, good. So then what we want to do is, I think we're done here, but let's go ahead over here and check how we should know that we're right. Okay, so we're going to say that we're going to do a 5-year loan of $10,000 with an APR of 8%. So let's go ahead and run this one. Okay, so we got the loan amount of $10,000. The loan number in years is 5. The APR is 8%. And when we run that, we get something that looks like this. So it's not perfectly formatted here, but it's pretty good actually. So the balance is a little bit off, so maybe we'd want to add another tab there. But basically we're saying here, the principal payment for the first payment is $136.10. Interest is $66.67. And my balance is going to be $9,863.90 after that first payment. Okay, so basically what you can do is you can think about adding these two together and subtracting that from 10,000, and that's what gives you that number right there.
Yeah, I got it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Taking this and subtracting it from 10,000 to get that. At the very end of this, so 5 years is 60 payments, we get down to $0. Even though it says -0, don't worry about that. We get down to $0 as our balance. So that is a good thing, right? That's a good thing. So if you're like upset about this not being lined up with the balance, then you could go ahead and add an extra tab before we do the last line here. So we go tab, run it one more time. $10,000 for 5 years at 8%. And now that's lined up a little bit nicer. Okay, so you can notice here that it looks like this is the tab level right here, and it's spaced in it's like one space in front of it. Okay, so that's because we're putting a space in between these tab characters that we have inside of our string to make it a little more readable. You know, there's some other things that you could do, like you could print out I to make sure that that's right. You could print out A to see how much you're paying each time, but we're not necessarily incredibly worried about that.